So good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to our CEO Chick Chat this morning with Dr. Grace Keenan. We are taping here live at Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman, headquartered here today at Tyson's Corner. We exchanged two locations. And I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us today on our CEO Chick Chat. It's going to be, buckle your seatbelts, this is all I can say. Grace is anything but shy and timid, so just be prepared. This is going to be provocative, interesting. Listen closely, you're going to learn a lot. Take notes because you may find out some health tips here that you want to know, either anti-aging or improving your health or alternative therapies. And Grace is an MD, so welcome, Dr. Grace Keenan.
Thank you.
I'm so happy to
Thank
see
you,
you.
Cynthia.
This is great. I adore you. I love it because you're one of those women who's outspoken, you're opinionated, you're bossy. You tell us what to do, and I love that. I love that you tell us what you think. But what I really find interesting is that you were actually not raised here. You were raised in a place where Maine is considered a southern state.
That's correct.
Yeah, you were raised in Canada.
Yes.
On the eastern seaboard side of Canada.
Yes.
And you were raised in a large family on a farm.
Yes.
In Canada.
Yes.
So tell us about your upbringing and what you did and how many kids and where you were in the birth order.
Sure. I was born on an Irish potato farm in eastern Canada, a place called Woodstock, so just north of Houlton, Maine. And I'm the youngest of 8 children. And it was a working labor type environment, always lots going on. My father and mother built this business from scratch, from nothing. In fact, my dad cleared the first 100 acres with a team of horses. So this is hard labor. And my mom was a school teacher, so she was deemed relatively well educated. And she basically ran the business from the kitchen and raised the family, and my dad ran the crews in the field.
So how did your family come to be, you know, and that's what I always find is our ancestry is always a fascinating topic. I don't know if you've watched that TV show where who do you think you are, and you kind of come back and you trace your roots.
Right.
How did so Irish potato farm, so I'm assuming that your parents were Irish?
Yes.
Did they immigrate from Ireland, or did their parents immigrate from Ireland?
Actually, my ancestors came out right before the potato famine, and what happened was a guy by the name of Mike Keenan, who was an Irish Catholic, married Catherine Carr, who was a Protestant, and so they needed to get out of town. So so they immigrated to Canada. So yeah,
it was interesting. My mother married my dad, who was Catholic, and in those days she was Southern Baptist, so she had to change.
Right. Oh, someone has to.
You had to make this commitment at the time that you couldn't have an interfaith marriage. It was required at the time, so that was really kind of interesting. She was Southern. My father was from the North, so it was like this family dynamic. They couldn't even understand how my mother talked, but I understand that because I was from Texas. So. So what did you, as you were growing up, and I always think this is an interesting question, what did you think you were going to grow up to do? What did you see yourself? What was the message coming to you as the youngest daughter and all these kids? What were you seeing through your lens of life that you were going to be or do?
Well, it was a very sexist environment. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Usually that word comes across that way. But there were jobs for women and there were jobs for men, and everyone was well employed on the farm, of course. Women were expected to clean the house and cook, and it wasn't thought of in a derogatory sense, but that was your job. You stayed where it was safe and out of the elements, and the men worked in the fields and, you know, performed the labor. But the idea was that when all was said and done, the farm would be for the 5 boys, and the girls would go get married, and my mother thought there was nothing better than being a good wife and a good mother. And so her goal was to raise us to do that. And so I think she gave up on trying to teach me anything to do with a needle when I refused to learn how to darn a pair of man's socks. So that kind of cashed it in. But I did learn to sew in the operating room many years later.
That is funny. You know, I got an F in home ec, but I got an A in shop. That probably told my parents a lot about me at the time. You know, they called, right. You can't put in a zipper. I said, he wasn't putting in a zipper. I guess if you're in medicine, though, a zipper could be.
But my mother did comment years later, that is a strange way to hem a pair of pants. But yeah. Anyway, surgical knots will keep it in place.
That's right.
But it was actually men who taught me how to sew. It wasn't my mother.
That's just really interesting. So what happened? What was the shift that occurred? Because here your messaging, your lens, your view was that, you know, if I'm on the right track of my life, I should grow up to be married and become a great wife, a great mother, perhaps a farmer, which is a great business, an honorable business in the world. So what happened?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I think I just turned out really different than the rest of my siblings, and for reasons that I think aren't discussed very much anymore. The youngest of 8, there was a lot going on, and so my parents hired a woman to take care of me. You know, there's a baby coming, and we're too busy to take care of her. And so her name was Evelyn Vance, and I called her Vancy. So as soon as I could talk, everyone called her Vancy. But she was a loving person, and so we spent a lot of time hugging and kissing and rocking in the rocking chair, and a lot of nurture. And I think we're lacking that today. I think a lot of ADHD and a lot of problems we have maybe could get resolved if we spent more time in the rocking chair. So I think I got a lot of nurture, and you know, it was a busy place, but it was a safe, productive environment really to be in. And there was consistency. You always knew what was coming the next day. It was predictable. And I think children like that and thrive in that environment. It was positive. And so I think you nurture as you were nurtured. And so, you know, so many years later when I had my own family, I was nurturing my children the way I was nurtured. And, you know, it's not an easy job being a parent, but I believe that the benefits come back a millionfold from nurturing not just your children, but others around you. So the people you work with, the people you work for, the people that work for you, and nurturing your patients.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and more often than not, and I'll throw the question out here, how many people in this room are firstborn? Okay, the majority of the people in this room are firstborn, and you find that people who become entrepreneurs or business leaders really are firstborn, and because I've been curious about you were the last. But there's different personality traits, and they do extensive studies on this on the birth order, but what was really interesting with you being the youngest child is that you had a caregiver who really made you the first child, the eldest child in a way.
Right.
You became an only child.
I was the daughter she'd never had.
Right, so you became, you kind of have some of those markers for a firstborn, which is really kind of interesting, even though, but you have this dual experience because you were the youngest and within this huge group family setting, but you were also a firstborn in the way that you were to this nanny. So I think that gave you some really great characteristics.
Well, I think also in that kind of environment, 8 children plus their parents sat at one table 3 times a day and discussed how the North 40 was going to get plowed by noon. You know, so there was a project and who's going to do what. And so even as a young child, well, you had a job. You know, there was some part in the whole puzzle that you played.
You're picking up the potatoes, or you're planning the meals.
Whatever you were doing, right? You were carrying a hot drink to someone, or you know, whatever you were doing.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and that's one of the things that you see a conversation emerging today about, that as families, we're no longer having the dinner table discussion. Right. And one thing, I stepped out of the career field when my children were young, and made sure that every single night we had family dinner. Every single night. And we were kind of known in the neighborhood. You know, you come and you have family dinner. Of course, we were the kind of parents who always goofed on our kids. So, like, they'd bring a friend over. We'd go, well, you have to stand up and tell us about yourself. And we see them get up, and our kids would be like, oh, you're such horrible parents. But I really think that that's really important. And I think you thrive because I think you learn a lot in that conversation when you stop and you're just together as a family. So I think that that's really, and then have a goal with the family.
Right, so I think all of these things generate self-confidence, nurturing predictable environments, and I think without self-confidence, we're in a rough spot. So I think that's critical, and I think if we can focus on doing that with our children, maybe the rest of it will come.
Absolutely, I think that's such a great thing. So if you have any message today, take time and plan family dinners. I mean, so much more is happening than the fact you've prepared a meal. You're really having an opportunity to engage with the people that matter most in your life, and those that you're influencing to become productive, happy people in our world today. So I think that's a great point.
And buy a rocking chair.
And buy a rocking, oh my gosh, a great rocking chair. Now, my grandmother believed that you need to have a rocking chair that had a squeak. That was really, she told my mother, you need to have a rocking chair. The other thing she also told my mother when I was a baby, because I was the firstborn, was that no matter what, you keep a baby totally covered and swaddled. So even in the summer, and you give them lots of prune juice or something. So I know that my mother was driving from Florida to move up to Norfolk right after I was born, and it was the heat of summer. They had me totally clothed and covered and were giving me prune juice. I understand that this turned into a very negative trip at some point, but I don't know. I survived it. So what's really interesting, where you went and started studying medicine. And what was the decision? Medicine. I want to go to school. Where did you think you were going to school, and how did that go over when you told your family?
Well, it's so funny, but I saw my personal situation on this farm one of no future, because regardless of what I ever did or how much skill I might show. I was a woman, and I was never going to own a thing there, and I would never have any say. And so I, at a young age, didn't like the way that felt, and I guess I was just an independent enough nature that this isn't good, and I don't know what else is out there, but I'm going to go find it. So I thought if I went into healthcare, I would never be in business. And the only business I knew was the potato business, and I wanted to make sure I never ended up in that. So
Potato, no.
So if I went into any career that involved business, I could end up back on the farm, and that was a risk I wasn't going to take. So I said, maybe I'll go into healthcare. So my very zero knowledge of the world and the future directed me that way. And I had some aptitude for math and sciences, so that was easy for me. I did well in those subjects. And I made an appointment at my doctor's office, and I went in and asked him if he thought I could be a doctor. And so that was where I sought guidance, and he thought maybe I could. And so that was the nature of that office visit that day. And then when I asked my mother, do you think I could be a doctor? She said, well, I don't know how you could do that and be a good wife and a good mother.
Oh, there was a conflict then, yeah.
And that was all the motivation I needed, actually. So there's like, being a good wife and a good mother, I'm going to be a doctor.
Yeah, interesting. So when you decided to go into medicine, when did Canada become a socialized medicine country?
I think when I was about 4 or 5. It's been a long time.
Okay, okay. I don't think I was really aware of it until we started engaging that conversation here. So you knew then that you would be interested in entering into a career path that involved socialized medicine, which probably has some positives and negatives. I don't think that there's any country probably has got this all figured out, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So where do you go to med school when you're in Canada? What's the med school options?
Right. Well, America is the land of opportunity. So if you grew up in Canada, it is not the land of opportunity. I think it is more now than it was then. The province I'm from didn't have a medical school. So I applied to Newfoundland, and at that time, 10 students from my province would be accepted every year at St. John's, Newfoundland at Memorial University.
So province is like a state?
Yes.
Okay, it's like a state.
Right, so it'd be like Virginia. It'd be like 10 people from Virginia get to go to medical school.
Okay.
And so I was accepted, and there were 500 applicants for every seat.
Wow.
So I really didn't dream I would ever get in. And so when I got in, it was kind of like I'd won the lotto.
Wow, it would be like that.
Yeah,
really.
I mean, I just couldn't believe it. And Newfoundland was a British colony until 1949. It was the last province to join Confederation of Canada. So it was a very British place. A lot of my professors were from Oxford.
So Newfoundland is further north, about, what did you say, 1,500 miles?
It's a 1,500-mile drive if you're going to St. John's, Newfoundland from where I'm from, which is 6 hours north of Boston, if you think about it that way. So this is a long way up there and out there. It is the northeast tip dangling in the North Atlantic. Was a very strategic place in the Second World War. And in fact, when the United States left there after the Second World War, they gave Gander Airport to what was then a British colony, to Newfoundland. And now Gander is a city in Newfoundland. And you all fly over it when you're going to Europe. You see Gander down there. They have the longest bar in the world, I understand. It's 1 mile long.
We're going to be known for something, I guess. Yeah, medical
So they're known for
and
drinking there, I think, keeping
Well,
warm.
It's pretty cold.
It's very cold, yes.
So you have maybe 4 weeks of kind of called summer. It's
Yeah, I think Newfoundland is just a wonderful place, and St. John's is a beautiful city. And yes, it's a short season, but it's a wonderful season. And actually, you have no darkness in the midst of the summer. So the sun rises, I think, about 3 in the morning and sets at 11 at night, and it's kind of just twilight. Beautiful place, wonderful people, and I couldn't have been more lucky to go to medical school anywhere in the world but there.
really. So tell me about from what you learned about medical school here and there. Was there a big difference?
Well, of course, we only get to go through this once, so you can't really compare it with what it was like somewhere else. But there, we were trained to serve the area, which, of course, that's why it was there. So we were trained to treat people in that vast area, vast geography, which includes Newfoundland, Labrador, and the Northwest Territories. So there were cottage hospitals. You were trained with hands-on. I had delivered 100 babies by the time I left medical school. So you really had a lot of experience before your time.